The hands of General Darius Thornton were pressed against the scorching hood of his Mercedes. Officer Rochelle Crow's weapon pointed straight at his spine. She shouted at him not to move. His military uniform jacket lay crumpled in the dust beside Interstate 45. 3 cars slowed as they passed, but none stopped. His phone rang in his pocket. The Pentagon. He knew this moment would define everything that came after. Yet Rochelle had no idea whom she had just stopped, and what was about to unfold would shake the entire nation. Darius Thornton had been driving peacefully along the interstate. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Texas landscape as he headed from San Antonio back toward Houston. Soft jazz flowed through the speakers of his Mercedes, the kind of music that made long drives feel shorter. He found himself tapping his fingers on the steering wheel in time with the rhythm. Today, he was dressed casually, a navy polo and khaki pants. Comfortable clothes for the drive home from the military base where he had just finished a high-level meeting with the commanders at Fort Sam Houston. His uniform jacket, adorned with 4 silver stars, was carefully folded on the passenger seat beside him, a reminder of the rank he had earned through decades of distinguished service to his country. He had commanded troops in 3 combat zones, advised presidents, and earned the respect of both soldiers and civilians. But in that moment, he was simply a man enjoying a quiet drive home, thinking about the upcoming meeting with the Joint Chiefs and wondering whether his wife Angela had remembered to pick up his dress uniform from the cleaners. The Mercedes hummed smoothly beneath him, a recent model he had bought as a modest reward after decades of service and sacrifice. He was not speeding. He knew that with absolute certainty. The cruise control was set carefully below the limit, a habit carved into him by years of military precision and discipline. When he first noticed the patrol car behind him, he thought little of it. Highway surveillance was common on that stretch of the interstate, and Darius had nothing to worry about. His registration was current, his insurance valid, his driving record flawless. But then the lights flashed, red and blue cutting through the afternoon haze, and a wave of confusion washed over him. He checked the speedometer again, confirmed he was not speeding, mentally reviewed every possible infraction, and found none. Still, he did what any responsible citizen would do. He activated his turn signal, carefully guided the Mercedes onto the shoulder, and came to a complete stop. He shut off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel where they were clearly visible, and waited. This was the protocol he himself had taught his children, the same careful routine Black parents across America drilled into their own. Keep your hands visible. Make no sudden movements. Comply with every instruction. He had performed this dance before more times than he cared to remember, and he had always walked away unharmed, though not always without cost. He reached slowly and deliberately toward the glove compartment for his license and military identification. That was when he heard the patrol car door slam behind him. He heard the approaching footsteps and a voice sharpened by authority and by something else, something that made his stomach tighten. Officer Rochelle Crow appeared at his window, her hand already resting on the weapon at her hip, her face fixed in an expression Darius recognized immediately, an expression he had seen too many times. "Keep your hands where I can see them," she barked. Darius stayed perfectly still, fingers inches from the glove box. He tried to explain calmly and measuredly that he was reaching for his documents, but Rochelle cut him off. "Get out of the vehicle," she ordered, and there was contempt in her voice, cold and unmistakable. He obeyed, unfolding his tall frame from the driver's seat. Standing at his full height, he kept his movements slow, his voice respectful. "Officer," he said, "can you tell me what violation I've committed?" Rochelle did not answer the question. Instead, her eyes swept over the Mercedes with suspicion, examining the luxury vehicle with an expression that made her thoughts clear. "Whose car is this?" she demanded. "Where did you steal it?" The question hit Darius like a physical blow. "This is my car," he answered, working to keep his voice steady. "I am an officer in the United States Army." He began to reach toward his pocket to show her his military identification to clear up what was clearly a terrible misunderstanding. But Rochelle's hand moved to her weapon, and she shouted, "Don't move!" Suddenly, her pistol was drawn, pointed directly at his chest. Darius's military training kicked in at once. He became completely still, hands raised to shoulder height. "Of course you are," Rochelle said, her voice dripping with mockery. "And I suppose you're a general, too." The sarcasm was thick, deliberate, designed to humiliate. Darius took a deep breath. He slowly reached for his wallet once more, trying one last time to show her his identification and end this nightmare. That was when Rochelle shouted again, "Don't move!" This time her weapon was steady, her finger near the trigger, and Darius knew with absolute certainty that one wrong movement could end his life right there on that Texas highway. And then, as if things could not get worse, 2 more patrol cars stopped behind Rochelle's vehicle, lights flashing, their officers stepping out with hands on their weapons. Rochelle had called for backup even before approaching him. She had reported a suspicious vehicle, setting in motion a chain of events that was about to spiral completely out of control. The 2 additional officers who arrived on the scene were Tom Rourke and Sarah Vale, both white, both looking at Darius with the same eyes full of suspicion that Rochelle carried. Rochelle immediately launched into her narrative, telling her colleagues she had caught Darius driving what she believed was a stolen vehicle. Her voice was firm and authoritative, as if she had just stopped a dangerous criminal. Darius tried to explain again, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Officers," he said clearly, "I am General Darius Thornton of the United States Army. My identification is in my wallet. I can show it to you if you allow me to reach for it." Officer Rourke snorted, even letting out a short laugh. "General," he said, drawing the word out with mockery, "in those clothes." Darius explained patiently that he was returning from a meeting in San Antonio, that he had traveled in civilian clothes, that his military uniform was folded on the passenger seat of his car. Rochelle seized on that immediately. "Now there's a uniform," she said in a tone that suggested this was just another lie, another story in what she clearly believed was a series of inventions. How convenient. While this exchange was happening, Officer Vale had gone to Darius's Mercedes and was searching it without asking permission, without probable cause, violating his Fourth Amendment rights in broad daylight. Darius, drawing on every ounce of self-control he possessed, spoke clearly. "You do not have probable cause to search my vehicle," he said without aggression. "I am simply stating a fact." Rochelle stepped closer, invading his personal space. "Don't tell me what I can and cannot do," she hissed. "You think you know the law?" Then she grabbed his arm roughly and forced him toward the hood of his car. Darius had no choice but to obey. She placed him with his arm stretched over the hood, and the metal was searing, hot after hours under the Texas sun. Darius grimaced when his palms touched the burning surface, but he did not pull away. He did not resist because he knew any sudden movement could be interpreted as aggression, could be used as justification for violence. Rochelle began to search him, and there was nothing professional about it. Her hands were deliberately rough, aggressive, checking with more force than necessary, and Darius endured it with his jaw clenched, his mind evaluating options and finding very few. She found his wallet in his back pocket and tossed it to Rourke as if it were evidence pulled from a crime scene. Rourke opened the wallet, examined the driver's license, and the military identification card Darius carried. For an instant, just an instant, Darius saw a spark of doubt cross the officer's face. Rourke showed the identification to Rochelle, holding it so she could see it clearly. Rochelle barely glanced at it before dismissing it completely. "Identifications can be faked," she said with absolute certainty. "Probably bought it online. You can get anything on the internet these days." Darius, still pressed against the burning hood of his car, made one last attempt to reason. "Call the Pentagon," he said. "They will verify my identity. They can confirm everything I'm telling you in a matter of minutes." Rochelle actually laughed at that. "Oh, he wants me to call the Pentagon," she said, shaking her head. "You really expect me to believe the Pentagon is going to take a call about you?" Meanwhile, Officer Vale had continued searching the Mercedes and emerged with a stack of papers in her hands, official documents bearing military seals and classification marks. She handed them to Rochelle, her voice uncertain. "These look pretty official," she said, unfolding the papers. "There are orders here with decorations, classified reports with seals." Rochelle barely glanced at them. Her mind was already decided, her story already formed. "Anyone can print documents," she said with disdain. "Have you seen the internet? You can download whatever you want and print it to look official. These are probably fake, too." Darius, still on his knees, drew on every ounce of authority he had accumulated through more than 3 decades of military service. "Officer Crow," he said, and his voice had changed, taking on the command tone that had sent soldiers into battle. that had made generals stop and listen. I am ordering you to contact Fort Sam Houston or the Pentagon immediately. This is a matter of national security. You are interfering with a military officer in the performance of his duties. Rochelle actually laughed, leaning down until she was at his eye level. You're giving me orders, she said, her voice thick with mockery. She moved even closer, close enough that Darius could see the conviction in her eyes, the absolute certainty that she was right and he was wrong. I don't care if you have a fake ID that says you're the President of the United States, she said slowly, emphasizing every word. In Texas, on my highway, you are just another criminal. One of the civilians in the growing crowd, a young black woman, shouted then. That's racist, she exclaimed. You're profiling him. You have no evidence, just assumptions. Rochelle spun on her heel, her hand moving toward her weapon in a gesture that may have been unconscious, but was still threatening. Anyone who doesn't leave right now will be arrested for obstruction of justice, she announced loudly. Most of the crowd stepped back at that threat, but they did not leave entirely. They simply moved to a safer distance. Their phones kept recording, capturing every moment of the encounter. Darius made a decision. He had already tried reason. He had tried explaining. He had tried showing identification. Nothing had worked. It was time for a different approach. Officer Crow, he said in a formal voice, I am requesting permission to make a phone call. Rochelle straightened, looking down at him. You'll get your call at the station, she said. Under Texas law, Darius continued, speaking clearly so the phone's recording could capture every word. I have the right to contact someone. I am no longer asking. I am telling you to allow me to make a call. Something in his tone made Officer Rourke shift uncomfortably. Rochelle, he said now with a doubtful voice. Maybe we should let him call someone to verify his story. What harm can it do? Rochelle turned on him, her expression angry. Don't go soft on me, Tom, she snapped. We have a car thief here, and I'm not going to let him manipulate us with false authority and invented military credentials. But Darius insisted. One call, Officer Crow. That is all I am asking. One call to verify my identity. If I am lying, you can charge me with everything you mentioned. But if I am telling the truth, you will have made the greatest mistake of your career. Rochelle reached into Darius's pocket, pulled out his phone, and looked at the screen. The missed calls were visible. The identifier was clear, even to her. Pentagon, Joint Chief's Office. She stared at it for a long moment, and Darius held his breath, hoping that perhaps she would finally begin to understand. But Rochelle's expression hardened. She looked Darius in the eyes and deliberately dropped the phone onto the concrete pavement. The screen shattered with a sharp crack, fragments of glass scattering across the ground. Oops, Rochelle said, her voice overflowing with false innocence. I guess it slipped. Darius watched his destroyed phone on the concrete. He saw his only connection to the Pentagon destroyed in an act of deliberate vandalism, and he took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm, forcing himself not to react in a way that could be used against him. A spectator stepped forward, an older white man wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap, his face weathered and serious, his posture still military despite his age. Officer, the man said, his voice strong and clear, this is wrong. You have to allow this man to make a phone call. Rochelle turned toward him, her hand moving toward her weapon. Sir, step back right now, she ordered. But the veteran did not retreat immediately. I fought for this country, he said, raising his voice. 30 years in the Army, this man clearly served too. The way he carries himself, the way he speaks, that's a soldier. Show some respect. Rochelle took a step toward him, her expression threatening. Sir, if you do not step back right now, I will arrest you for obstruction and interference with a police investigation. Darius, still on his knees with his hands cuffed behind his back, spoke to the veteran. Sir, he said, and his voice was soft despite his own extreme situation. Thank you for your service and for defending me, but please step back. I do not want anyone else hurt because of this. The veteran looked at Darius, a recognition passing between two soldiers, and reluctantly stepped back several paces, though he remained in sight, remained watching. Officer Vale murmured something to Rochelle, her voice low but audible to Darius. This is getting out of control, Rochelle. Maybe we should call a supervisor, have someone else come handle this. Rochelle turned on her colleague with barely contained fury. Maybe you should remember who is in charge here, Sarah. I am the senior officer on the scene, and I am handling this situation. Now step away." Darius, still on his knees, made eye contact with the veteran, and an understanding passed between them, the recognition of one soldier to another. "Sir," Darius said clearly, "in my uniform jacket, in the inside pocket, there is a card. It has an emergency number." The veteran understood immediately. He moved toward the Mercedes where the uniform jacket still lay on the passenger seat. Rochelle began to move to stop him, but Officer Rourke stepped into her path. His own doubts were now visible. "Rochelle," Rourke said firmly, "we're going to see what happens. Let's verify his story. If he's lying, we'll know in a few minutes. If he's telling the truth, then we need to handle this in a very different way." Rochelle glared at him, rage barely contained beneath the surface. "You two are going to regret this," she said. The veteran found the card in the inner pocket of the jacket. A simple business card with an official seal and a telephone number. Joint Chiefs of Staff. Emergency contact line. He pulled out his own phone and dialed the number, then walked over to Darius and held the phone to his ear. It rang twice, and Darius could hear his own heart hammering in his chest. A voice answered, professional and alert. "Joint Chiefs of Staff Emergency Line. This is Colonel Avery Lang." Darius spoke clearly, his voice carrying the authority of his rank even while kneeling on the ground. "Colonel Lang, this is General Thornton, authentication code Sierra Tango 7 Delta Victor." There was a brief pause on the other end, and Darius could imagine Lang checking his information, verifying the code against classified records. "General Thornton," Lang's voice returned, surprise and concern evident even through the phone. "Sir, we have been trying to reach you. Your phone appeared disconnected. What is your situation?" Darius kept his voice firm, professional, giving the facts without emotion. "I am detained on Interstate 45, northbound, approximately 30 miles from Houston. Local police have me in custody, badge number 6347. I need immediate assistance and witnessed verification of my identity and status." Another pause, longer this time. Then Lang's voice came back, all business. "Understood, General. Stay on the line. We are mobilizing assets now." What followed happened with the speed and precision of a military operation. Within minutes, the sky filled with the sound of approaching helicopters. Federal agents in unmarked vehicles converged on the scene. A military police unit from the nearest base arrived with lights and sirens. The local officers found themselves surrounded by forces they had never imagined answering to. When the ranking officer, Lieutenant Colonel Wu, approached, he took one look at Darius still on his knees, still handcuffed, and his face hardened into something cold and dangerous. He walked straight to Rochelle. "Uncuff him, now!" Rochelle, for the first time, looked uncertain. "Sir, this man—" "That man," Wu said, his voice like ice, "is General Darius Thornton of the United States Army, a decorated combat veteran and member of the Joint Chiefs Advisory Circle. You have just assaulted a federal officer, violated his civil rights, and obstructed a matter of national security. Uncuff him. Immediately." The handcuffs came off. Darius rose slowly, the gravel biting into his knees, the sun still beating down. He accepted a bottle of water from one of the federal agents, but refused medical attention beyond the most basic check. He stood tall, uniform jacket now properly on his shoulders, 4 stars gleaming in the late light. The crowd that had gathered erupted. Phones continued recording as the truth settled over everyone present. Rochelle and her colleagues were relieved of duty on the spot and taken into federal custody. In the days that followed, the video footage, captured by multiple civilians, spread across the nation. The images of a 4-star general on his knees on a Texas highway, handcuffed by an officer who refused to believe a black man could own a luxury car or hold such rank, ignited a firestorm. Congressional hearings were called. Darius testified for nearly 3 hours before a bipartisan committee, his voice steady and powerful. "I had the rare privilege," he said, "of being able to make a single phone call that brought military helicopters and federal agents to rescue me. Most Americans do not have that option. They suffer these indignities in silence. They endure racial profiling, excessive force, the violation of their constitutional rights, and no one comes to help them. Some do not survive the encounter. Some die because an officer made assumptions, acted on prejudice, saw a threat where none existed. This has to change. We sorry, already. The result was unprecedented bipartisan support for comprehensive police reform legislation. Outside the Capitol, massive protests organized in support of Darius and the broader movement for police accountability. Signs filled the streets. "We stand with General Thornton. Serve with honor, protect with justice. End racial profiling." The crowd was diverse, not only Black Americans, but people of every race, age, and background, united in the conviction that what had happened to Darius was a symptom of larger problems affecting everyone. Rochelle Crow's trial was scheduled, but her legal team was already negotiating a plea agreement. Her family issued another statement, attempting to humanize her while acknowledging her misconduct. Rochelle was raised in a culture that taught fear and prejudice. The statement said, "We do not condone her actions, but we want people to understand she was shaped by systems and teachings larger than any individual. She is accepting responsibility for her decisions, but we hope people will also examine the systems that created those decisions." The statement received mixed reactions across the country. Some saw it as an excuse, an attempt to shift individual responsibility onto society at large. Others viewed it as a necessary recognition that racism is systemic and that changing individual behavior requires changing the cultures and institutions that shape that behavior. Darius was contacted by dozens of organizations wanting him to become a spokesperson, a figurehead for various reform movements. He declined most of those invitations. "I am a soldier, not an activist," he told reporters who asked about his future plans. "But I recognize this is a battle worth fighting, and I am committed to using the platform this incident has given me to push for real and meaningful change." He did agree to work closely with one organization, the Alliance for Justice Reform, a coalition of civil rights groups, legal advocates, and community organizers working on comprehensive police reform at the local, state, and federal levels. The veteran who had helped Darius make the critical call, Harold Reed, became an unexpected but powerful ally in the reform movement. Reed organized a group called Veterans for Justice Reform, bringing together former military personnel of every race who had witnessed or experienced racial injustice and were committed to advocating for change. "We all fought for a country that promises liberty and justice for all," Reed said in interviews. "When a decorated general can be treated the way General Thornton was treated, when the color of someone's skin determines how they are policed instead of the content of their character, then we have not kept those promises. We have not honored the values we fought to defend." New evidence emerged that changed the nature of the case entirely and proved beyond any doubt the premeditated racial intent that led to Darius's detention. A private security camera at a gas station a short distance before the stop captured footage of Rochelle Crow's patrol car pulling into the station. The audio from that camera recorded a telephone conversation she was having. The images showed Rochelle laughing, talking on her personal phone, and the audio was crystal clear. The words she spoke, captured on video and authenticated by multiple forensic experts, were damning beyond any possible defense. "Yeah, I see him up ahead," Rochelle's voice said, casual and confident. "Fancy Mercedes. Probably stolen. These people think they can drive through here like they own the place. I'm going to teach this rich black guy a lesson he won't forget." The racial slur she used was explicit and unmistakable, leaving no doubt about her motivations, her prejudice, and her intent. The video showed her ending the call, returning to the highway, and accelerating to catch up to Darius's vehicle. The entire sequence, from her declared intention to racially profile and harass him to the actual stop, was documented and irrefutable. The security camera footage destroyed any remaining defense Rochelle Crow or her lawyers might have tried to construct, eliminating even the weak argument that her actions were based on legitimate law enforcement concerns rather than pure racial animus. Within hours of the material becoming public and being delivered to federal prosecutors, Rochelle's legal team abandoned any pretense of fighting the charges and began plea negotiations. She appeared before a federal judge and pleaded guilty to all counts: civil rights violations, assault on a federal officer, destruction of government property, obstruction of justice, and official misconduct. The judge, citing the premeditated nature of her actions and the betrayal of public trust, sentenced her to federal prison, permanently stripped her of her law enforcement certification, and ordered the loss of her pension and any future possibility of employment in any police force within the United States. But the story of Darius Thornton was far from over, because what had begun as one man's traumatic encounter on a Texas highway had become something much larger, something that was changing the national conversation about race, policing, and justice in America. Congress passed landmark legislation that would forever be known as the Thornton Act, a comprehensive police reform law that demanded radical changes in the way law enforcement operated across the country. The legislation included everything Darius had proposed in his congressional testimony and more. Mandatory federal oversight of departments with patterns of civil rights complaints, body cameras that could not be deactivated and that uploaded footage to independent servers, civilian review boards with real disciplinary authority, enhanced training in de-escalation and implicit bias, strict limits on qualified immunity for officers who violated constitutional rights, and federal funding tied to compliance with these new standards. Darius protested that the law carry his name, arguing repeatedly that it should honor the countless victims of police violence who had not survived their encounters, who had not had the privilege of helicopters and federal agents arriving to rescue them. This should carry the names of Breonna Taylor, of George Floyd, of every person who did not have my rank or my connections, he insisted in multiple interviews. But Congress held firm, and the name remained, becoming a permanent reminder of how a single incident had catalyzed change, how one man's refusal to accept injustice had ignited a movement. Darius returned to his military duties, but his purpose had changed in a fundamental way. He founded the Thornton Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal support and representation to victims of racial profiling and police misconduct. He funded body camera programs for under-resourced police departments that wanted to improve but lacked the means. And he offered comprehensive training programs in de-escalation, bias awareness, and constitutional policing. The foundation grew rapidly, sustained by donations from across the country, military veterans, civil rights advocates, and ordinary citizens who believed change was not only necessary, but possible. 1 year after the incident that had changed his life and ignited a national movement, Darius received an unexpected visit at his office on the military base. His aide informed him that Patricia Crow, Rochelle's mother, was requesting a meeting. After a moment of reflection, Darius agreed to see her. Patricia entered his office escorted by military police, a white woman in her 60s whose face showed the weight of the past year, the guilt, and the gradual understanding of the harm her family had caused and perpetuated. "General Thornton," she said, her voice trembling, "I know I have no right to be here, no right to ask for your time or your attention." Darius indicated the chair in front of his desk. His expression was neutral but not cruel. "Please, sit down." Patricia sat, her hands twisting restlessly in her lap. When she spoke, tears began to run down her face. "I raised my daughter wrong," she said. "I taught her to fear people who did not look like us, to judge by the color of skin instead of character, to see difference as threat. My mother did the same to me, and her mother before her. We passed prejudice down like a family tradition, like something that had to be preserved and protected, and now my daughter is in prison, and she deserves to be there. But I am responsible too. I created the person who did those terrible things to you." Darius listened without interrupting, allowing her to speak, to confess, to acknowledge. "Mrs. Crow," he said finally, "I appreciate that you came and that you are honest about your family's role in perpetuating racism. But the person you really need to have this conversation with is your daughter." Patricia nodded, wiping her eyes. "I have been. I visit her every week. At first she was angry, defensive, convinced she had been treated unfairly. But little by little she is beginning to understand. She has started reading, learning about the history of racism in America, about how policing has been used as a tool of oppression, about the harm she caused, not only to you, but to communities of color everywhere." She pulled an envelope from her purse and held it out to Darius with trembling hands. "Rochelle wrote this. She asked me to give it to you. She does not expect you to forgive her. She does not believe she deserves it. She just wants you to know she is trying to understand what she did and why she did it." trying to become a better person, even if that can never undo the damage. Darius took the letter but did not open it immediately. He set it on his desk. "I will read it," he said. "But Mrs. Crow, you must understand that this is not about individual redemption or personal forgiveness. A letter, the growth of one person, does not change the systemic problems that led to that stop on the highway. The work is much larger than any individual." Patricia nodded firmly. "I know," she said. "In fact, that is why I am here. That is why I wanted to speak with you. I have started working with a group of families of law enforcement officers who have committed acts of racial violence or discrimination. We are trying to break the cycle, to examine how we raise our children, what values we teach them, what fears and prejudices we pass on without even realizing it. We are working with educators, psychologists, community leaders to develop programs that teach different values, that emphasize empathy, equality, and human dignity. It is small, just beginning, but we are trying to do something." Oh. Darius felt surprise register on his face. "That is important work, Mrs. Crow," he said, and his voice carried genuine respect. "Breaking intergenerational cycles of prejudice is one of the hardest challenges we face. If families can examine their own biases and consciously choose to teach different values to their children, that creates real change from the ground up." After Patricia left, Darius sat alone in his office, the unopened letter on the desk in front of him. His wife Angela entered, having waited in the outer office during the meeting. "Are you going to read it?" she asked, nodding toward the letter. "Eventually," Darius said, "but right now I need to focus on the work that matters." He gestured to the documents spread across his desk. Requests to the Thornton Foundation from people seeking legal help, progress reports from police departments implementing new training programs, data analyses showing measurable reductions in bias-motivated stops in cities that had adopted reforms, and communications from congressional offices about expanding the provisions of the Thornton Act. Angela sat beside him, taking his hand. "You changed something, Darius," she said quietly. "That terrible day on the highway, it changed everything." Darius shook his head. "No," he said. "It did not change anything. It exposed what was always there. The racism, the profiling, the systemic injustice. None of that was new. What changed was that people paid attention, that the dramatic rescue made it impossible to ignore or dismiss. But the real change, the meaningful change, that is what we do afterward. That is the work of reform, of accountability, of building new systems that actually serve and protect everyone equally." Their conversation turned to their children, Marcus Jr.'s civil rights law practice, which had expanded dramatically, taking police misconduct cases across the state, and Lieutenant Sarah Thornton, who had become an advocate within the armed forces for addressing racial discrimination in the military. The final scene of that extraordinary chapter in Darius Thornton's life came on a quiet afternoon when he found himself driving that same stretch of Interstate 45, heading from Houston back to San Antonio for another round of military meetings. As he approached the familiar mile marker, he saw that someone had placed a small memorial on the shoulder, a simple sign that read, "Place of Change. Let us remember and do better." Darius did not stop. He could not stop on the busy highway, but he watched in the rearview mirror as other drivers pulled over to take photographs, to pay respects, to mark the place where something important had occurred. His phone rang, and for an instant his chest tightened, an echo of that day when the Pentagon had called and Rochelle had smashed his phone against the concrete. But this time it was a routine call, simply another military matter requiring his attention. And he answered with professionalism, continuing his drive along the road that stretched before him into the Texas landscape. For the first time since the incident, Darius felt something move inside him. Not exactly hope, because hope implied uncertainty about the outcome, but a sense of possibility. The recognition that his worst day had somehow become the catalyst for something better, not only for himself, but for countless people who would face traffic stops in the future, who would encounter law enforcement with their constitutional rights more firmly protected, who would benefit from the reforms and accountability measures being implemented across the country. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. The work was not finished. Darius knew that with absolute certainty. It might never be finished, not in his lifetime, perhaps not in any lifetime, because the roots of racism ran deep in American soil, tangled in institutions, cultures, and individual hearts. But the work had truly begun, ignited by that moment of injustice on a Texas highway, amplified by the dramatic rescue that captured the nation's attention, and sustained by thousands of people, black, white, and every shade in between, who had decided that the status quo was unacceptable and that real change was not only necessary but achievable. On that highway in Texas, where Darius Thornton had remained kneeling and handcuffed under the blazing sun while a racist officer pointed a weapon at him, the place had become something more than a point on a map. It had become a symbol, not of victimization but of resistance, not of defeat, but of the power that comes from refusing to accept injustice, from making that critical call, from speaking truth to power even when that power has you on your knees. The rescue had been dramatic. The helicopters and federal agents had created a powerful television moment, and the story had spread like wildfire across social media and news networks. But Darius understood that the true victory was not the rescue itself, not the moment Lieutenant Colonel Wu rendered a military salute, not when federal agents announced a full investigation. The true victory was what came after. Oh, yeah. The Thornton Act changing how police operated across the United States. The foundation providing support to victims who otherwise would have nowhere to turn. The national conversations about race and justice that were finally happening in living rooms, boardrooms, and congressional chambers. The small but measurable improvements in the way law enforcement treated communities of color. And, perhaps most important, the message sent to every black person in America that their lives mattered, that injustice would not be tolerated, that change was possible. As Darius drove under the afternoon sun, the Texas landscape sliding past his windows, he thought of all the people who had played a part in this story. From Officer Rochelle Crowe, whose prejudice had ignited everything, to Harold Reed, the veteran whose courage had been crucial. From his own family, who supported him through the trauma and what came after, to the strangers who recorded the incident, spread it online, protested in the streets, and demanded accountability. He thought of Patricia Crowe trying to break generational cycles of racism, of the police departments genuinely attempting to reform their practices, of the legislators who drafted and passed the Thornton Act despite political pressures, of all the small acts of courage and commitment that were changing, slowly and incrementally, the landscape of American justice. And he knew, with the certainty that comes from decades of military service and the hard wisdom that comes from surviving, what should have been simply another drive home, that the fight continued, that vigilance was necessary, that progress could be reversed if people stopped paying attention or caring or demanding better. But for now, on this road, in this moment, Darius Thornton was a general driving home, a black man in an expensive car who knew that because of what he had endured and how he had responded, the next black man in an expensive car might be treated a little more fairly, might be given the benefit of the doubt, might make it home safely to his family. The highway stretched before him, mile after mile, and Darius Thornton continued with it, carrying forward the responsibility that had been placed upon him that terrible day, carrying forward the hope that his children and grandchildren might live in a country that finally kept the promises on which it was founded, carrying forward the determination to ensure that his moment of injustice was not in vain, but became a turning point, a catalyst, a beginning rather than an end.